Good evening. Welcome to the January 3rd meeting of the Salt Lake City Historical Landmarks Commission. We did not have a field trip tonight since we had all been up to see the site that is in question tonight. We had, as per custom, we enjoyed dinner down below and chatted, but conducted no official business. Has everyone had a chance to read through the minutes there are no minutes from last meeting because it was canceled. Therefore, approval of the minutes is not going to happen. Pardon? Easy.
Approve the ones before that.
Okay. Have the commissioners read the minutes from the November 1st meeting? If so, is anyone willing to make a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion. We have a second. Very good. We have a motion and a second for approval of the November 1st meeting minutes. Let's take a voice vote. All in favor, please.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay. One abstention, the rest in favor. The minutes from November 1st are accepted. As the chair, I have nothing to report tonight. Robert, do you have anything to?
I don't. Thank you.
Very good. Michaela, anything from your end?
Report.
Nothing
Happy
to report.
New Year.
Happy New Year. Very good. The first item on the agenda is request for extension of approval for new construction at approximately 563 East, 600 South. Amy, how do we proceed with this? Do you get up and talk to us about it?
I made a couple slides just in case you didn't remember what these projects were, and maybe some of you weren't actually here for them. But the first one is a request for an extension. It's at 563 East 6 South, and it was approved by the Commission on December 7th of 2018. And the request is by Kristen Clifford, and it was for a certificate of appropriateness for new construction of a mixed-use building. It has commercial on the ground floor, residential unit on the ground floor, and then I believe 2 or 3 residential units on the upper floors. It also involves demolition of a non-contributing building, and that's the one that's in the photo that's currently Vantage Vintage, and then they're retaining that historic duplex to the rear. So this project had a lot of twists and turns, and following the Commission's approval, they had to get approval from the Planning Commission, which they received for plan development because the lot to the rear doesn't have frontage on a public street. And then they submitted for a plat, and they ran into some issues with the fire department. So they're currently trying to resolve those, but that's the reason for a little bit of a delay to their timeline. So that's the first request. I don't know if you do them separately or if you want me to just go on to the next one.
Let's do them separately, please.
That's all I have on this one, unless you have questions.
Okay. Would we just take a vote on this one? Yes, I'd like a motion, please, for approval or denial.
I'd make a motion to approve continuation of the request, and if you want to fill in the numbers, you can.
I'll second that.
Very good. We have a motion and a
I think
second.
we need a more specific time frame on that extension.
I'll give it 1 year.
A 12-month extension would be the modification to my motion.
I'll second that.
Very good. We have a motion and a second for a 12-month extension to this approval. Can we take a vote, please, starting on my right with Paul?
Aye.
Aye.
Shepherd, aye. Brennan, aye.
Esther, aye.
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 The motion passes.
And so the second one is at 1117 East South Temple, and the commission also granted approval of this on December 7th of 2018, and they are requesting an extension to their new construction approval and their associated special exception approval for a multifamily residential building at approximately 1117 East South Temple. I inherited this project from Michael Malloy, who is another planner here, so I'm not as familiar with this one as I was the previous one, but following the commission's approval, the applicant worked with planning staff to satisfy some of the conditions of approval, which were details that were delegated to staff related to the windows, also attempting to preserve the tree. They also ran into some issues with the fire department and fire access, and I believe with this project those issues have been resolved, but the applicant's requesting an additional extension of time in order to secure funding for construction of the project.
All right, thank you, Amy. Does the commission think that another year on this one is appropriate? If so,
How long can they have?
I think a year would be typically the duration.
I think a year would be customary.
Yeah. So would someone like to make a motion with regards to this project?
Grant a one-year extension.
Okay,
Grant a one-year extension on this project.
very good. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second to grant a one-year extension for this project. Could we have a vote? Excuse me, vote please, Shelley?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
That request is approved. Thank you very much. Next, we'll go into public comments. I have one. Thank you, Frank. One general public comment request from Cindy Cromer. Would you please come forward?
55 years ago, there was a show on television called That Was the Week That Was. It was wickedly analytical. Today, we don't replay events very often, mostly sporting events and Trump's tweets. But there's merit, I think, in looking at your last commission meeting, the one in November. It was remarkable for showing the breadth of what you can do and the difference you can make. Taking it from the top, you sent Garbett Homes off to work with the neighbors on West Capitol, and to their credit, the developers did, returning with a project that satisfied almost everyone. Then you had an important project at the Union Pacific Depot. Your hearing documented the easements for public access, and you retained some authority over the final design. The attic additions on First Avenue were an example of your doing what needed to be done, even if it was no fun at all. And you wrapped up with a recommendation to the National Register for one of Slack Winburn's gyms. So you made decisions and recommendations, followed up on a petition that you dealt with previously, and you put yourself in a position to revisit a very important project. You provided information to disgruntled citizens, whether they listened or not, and there weren't many who were disgruntled. The big developers were bright lights that night. Yep, it was a meeting that was, and it was a good one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. We should. All right. Okay. Let us move on now to the public hearing on the twin home development at approximately 578 and 610 Northwest Capitol Street. Please proceed.
I'll be with you shortly.
Out of 4.
Hello and good evening. We're gradually getting there, one quarter coming in. But I'll kick this off. This particular proposal, I think you may recall, was before you in almost exactly a year ago, January 4th, 2018. At that point in time, that was a work session with preliminary proposals in terms of sort of the settlement pattern and the overall approach to the site. Just a quick reminder of the site itself, fronting West Capitol to the west and fronting Darwin to the east. It's composed of 2 lots which are not quite contiguous. Falls within the Capitol Hill Historic District and the SR1A residential zone. This particular proposal is for 12 twin home dwellings arranged in 6 buildings. And briefly touching on the background here and the previous proposal, that proposal was for 14 units arranged in 7 buildings with a separate private access drive to provide access to a number of the units themselves. As I mentioned, the Commission reviewed that proposal at a work session on the 1st or the 4th of January 18. And that proposal, because of its private road and the arrangement of buildings on the site and a number of them not fronting onto a public street, both required Planning Commission review for plan development as well as a subdivision approval. Planning Commission actually looked at that proposal and across the course of 2 meetings in May and June 2018, they approved that proposal. However, since that point in time and partly responding to Commission comments, partly responding to neighbourhood concerns, the applicants have reviewed the overall proposals for the site and come back with a reduced proposal. Now, 12 units rather than 14. There is no private road in this revised approach, and the arrangement of the buildings is rather different, as you will have noted. So summarizing the current proposal, we have 4 buildings and 8 of the dwellings arranged now facing directly onto Darwin Street. 2 of the buildings and 4 of the dwelling units facing West Capitol, with 12 residential units in total, an approximate 1,550 to 1,600 square feet in area each. Each dwelling will have a 2-car garage. There has been considerable thought given to building design in relation to the variation, in particular in relation to massing and roof form and building footprint, to variation in design, and to variation in materials. And I'll come back to those points shortly and in slightly greater detail. But those were points which the Commission was addressing previously at the work session in January 18. There are a number of special exception requests associated with the current design for the site, and I'll come back to those as well. It is, as you're aware, a very challenging site in just about every respect. Brief comment on its Northeast Capitol Hill context. This is primarily a single-family setting. In context, there are a few apartment buildings as well. The lots tend to be deep and narrow and set diagonally to the street pattern. And building orientation tends to echo the lot orientation. This proposal effectively amounts to an infill development proposal on West Capitol on both ends of the site, the north and the south. Whereas on Darwin Street, there is a continuous street frontage of approximately 240 feet. which will establish a complete street facade for part of this site. There are a series of defined patterns and variations from those patterns, which one can identify within this immediate context, giving it rather an eclectic character and one which directly relates to the setting of the buildings within the topography and the immediate context and the maturity of the site. Very quickly running through some photographs of the site as a reminder. This is West Capitol Street, looking in two directions, both directions. Access points to the site itself off West Capitol Street. And again, north and south, top and bottom. Several shots taken interior to the site as it currently exists. More interior shots. The one below looking, well, both of these looking directly towards the southern end of the site, and the apartment building in the background, which you can also see in the top photograph here. And then a reference to the topography of the Darwin Street side of this particular site, as it currently exists. Then looking itself back across the site from Darwin Street, westward and northward, from the lower end of the site below. Again, final views from Darwin Street across the site. The proposals before you this evening, I will run through the majority of the application information. This staff report is comprehensive in terms of its inclusion of all of that material. I have included the majority of it here and omitted a few of the drawings just for brevity. This site plan, you can see the context of the site wrapping around the existing dwellings and the generally U-shaped nature of the site. The four dwellings facing Darwin Street in a staggered pattern. And the the 4 buildings and 8 dwellings. And then the 2 buildings and 4 dwellings facing West Capitol Street. Again, staggered slightly, which has a positive impact on the scale, potentially. Figure ground plans, setting it slightly more into context with existing development on the other side of West Capitol Street. And to the immediate north of the site, to a limited extent to the south of the site, as well as those buildings it surrounds. And we have here photo montage of the street frontages. The upper one is Darwin Street, which as you will be aware, and as you can see from this montage, is mostly open. At this point in time. And then below West Capitol Street, where the montage captures the buildings along both sides of that street, effectively. And then looking at basically a compilation series of building elevations, both looking from the west above and also from the east on Darwin Street below. A series of aerial perspectives to put the arrangement of the buildings here into slightly more effective three-dimensional form, not referencing in this context the existing buildings within this setting from another view from a different angle. You can see the 2 buildings and 4 dwellings facing West Capitol Street. And then a number of aerial perspectives where the new proposals are actually set within the context of the existing buildings and also the fairly mature landscaping across various parts of the site. Aerial perspective again, looking from the Darman Street side. The buildings facing Darman Street will largely face the street with garage frontage. I'll come back to that point shortly. And then another aerial perspective, setting that in context, overlooking Darman Street. Moving now on to a selection of the individual building and site plans for the different lots. This is lot 1 and 2, which is the northern end of the site facing West Capitol Street. You can see the staggered building form of the 2 units here. And then the applicants have provided an assessment of how the proposals relate to the SR1A zoning maximums. In terms of heights, those areas protruding through the blue here are those sections which will require special exception approval. And then that's confirmed again in the section lines below the drawing below the isometric here. And then the various building elevations for those particular lots. And then the applicants have also been working on developing the design, materials and detailing of the particular buildings. So this is three-dimensional rendering in slightly greater detail of the proposal for lots 1 and 2. Moving now to lots 3 and 4, which is one of the Darman Street buildings. I haven't gone into all of these because they tend to mirror each other, although the building designs differ. I'll come back to the building design again shortly. But again, you can see in terms of the plan form a very strongly staggered building footprint for each of the units. There is a setback variation of approaching 22 feet, really, between one unit and the other, in terms of this dual arrangement for each of these buildings along Darman Street. One effect of that, as the report, I think, endeavors to point out, is that you don't end up with a sort of an unbroken street wall. You end up with a series of sort of slightly smaller scale buildings as they approach and front the street. And again here, indicating what parts of that particular proposal would actually infringe the SR1A zoning maximums and will require special exception approval. Again, verified by the section below. And the elevations for that particular proposal and those 2 units. Several other renderings of that sequence of buildings along Darman Street in greater detail, indicating the variation in materials, roof form, the degree to which the buildings are actually staggered down the hillside, and also terraced, and from 2 different angles as well, the same sequence of buildings. And then the four buildings, the 8 units, as viewed from the west, as currently proposed along the Darwin Street side of the proposals. And then coming back briefly to lots 11 and 12, this is the site plan for that particular lot. This appears to be incomplete from the point of view that it appears to include just one of the buildings rather than both of them. I know that the applicant has been working on this and has been in a discussion with the neighbours in the context of this one, so there may be additional material to address this particular configuration in the applicant's presentation shortly. And again, where the proposal would actually sort of nudge through the sort of the SR1A maximum height limit picked up by the section line below. And the elevations proposed for that particular combination of the two buildings. And a slightly greater rendered detail. There are several points in relation to this proposal which are slightly unusual. One of them actually is the fact that a number of the main entrances do not and cannot readily face the street. With this overall configuration and with the challenges of this particular site, this is one rendering here indicating where the designs are going in relation to highlighting the main entrance way for this particular proposal, which will inform what happens on some of the others as well. I anticipate the applicant will have additional information on the development of that aspect of the designs. And here we have another one. The rendering below has been developed with further emphasis for that side entrance in the rendering above. Coming back, setting the sequence of buildings into its context more effectively, looking from the west above and then from Darman Street on the east below, and then a section line running through the site from the buildings in Darman Street down towards West Capitol, showing the relationship between the two. And I wanted to include a slide of the previous development proposal to remind you where that stood when we discussed this last January. So this was the configuration at that point in time, which is a much denser and more regular layout. So the special exceptions requested with this application include a number of requests to reduce side setbacks for a number of the units. The actual request is detailed in your application materials, but reducing effectively a number of the 10-foot side yards to 5 feet. To exceed the building height, and that varies by building, it tends to range from between 1 foot and 8 feet across that range of buildings. And obviously the wall height, in the context of that as well, tends to be exceeded between 2 feet and 8 feet. There will be grade changes, obviously, across this site in terms of sort of making this overall site work and for this construction. So there will be various grade changes in excess of 4 feet across this site. A couple of other considerations before you, as I mentioned previously, garages facing the street, which we usually try and avoid. I don't know that we have the opportunity to avoid that in this particular case, certainly not along the Darwin Street side. And the primary entrance is not facing the street, which again is a constraint to the site. So identified for you in the staff report are perhaps 5 key considerations. I tried to break those down from a hierarchy point of view. The first one deals with settlement pattern, where I think one can certainly identify compatibility in a range of design criteria, which would include lot form, configuration of buildings and the lots themselves, and the orientation of both lots and buildings. And also, with this particular revised proposal, we have all of the residences directly addressing the street, which was not previously the case, public street. There is no internal private street. Second major area of consideration is in relation to topography. As you're aware, this is an extremely challenging site, but it's also one which tends to provide a lot of potential for compatibility as well, in terms of settling the proposed buildings into the site. So despite the degree of grading and excavation which would be required, it is certainly one way of actually working closely with the existing and proposed topography to reduce the scale and increase the variety of what's being proposed with this particular development. You will have noted that there has been considerable effort to terrace each of the buildings with the terrain on the site. That again breaks down the massing, helps with an eclectic range of architectural character, and helps to reduce the scale of the overall proposal in terms of the individual buildings and the combination of buildings. And then we have the 8 dwellings facing Dorman Street, the steepest slope, which is certainly the most challenging part of the proposal. Further key consideration in relation to scale, staff would identify compatibility in terms of the building massing and configuration. That is both varied and also staggered and terraced. There is also a fairly successful attempt, I think, at equating with the range and variety and form and design and the materials of this particular context in terms of what's before you this evening and the thought that's been given to the overall approach here since you last saw the previous scheme. Moving on to design variety, one could identify compatibility with the context here. The applicants have introduced, I think it's 3 basic building designs and variations on those themes. They have effectively terraced the massing with the terrain, as I mentioned previously, and also effectively staggered the building footprints, which tends to break down the scale, break down the massing, and help with the character of what's being proposed. The palette of materials currently proposed seems to be fairly closely based on an analysis of the context, including brickwork, stucco, and siding. And then finally, in terms of those considerations, one would identify compatibility in terms of roof forms. The proposal before you now has a range of roof forms, again adding to the eclectic nature of what's being proposed within what is a fairly eclectic setting. Again, variety is enhanced by terracing with those roof forms themselves and staggering the building footprints. So just before coming to the recommendation before you this evening, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we've had several public comments on these proposals. I think you should have received copies of all of those, both previously and since. There's been one additional comment recently and one revised comment. You will have all of those. To summarize, one comment is generally in support of the revised proposals. There is one with general concerns about the overall approach to the site. And then there is one with particular concerns regarding lots 1 and 2, and another with particular concerns regarding lots 11 and 12. You will have that information before you. I'm aware that one or more of those members of the public may well wish to address those points in more greater detail later in the public hearing section of the proceedings. So before you this evening, in the context of the staff analysis, the recommendation is that based on the analysis and findings listed in the staff report, staff recommends that the Commission approve the application for a certificate of appropriateness for the construction of 12 twin home dwellings and approve the special exception requests associated with these proposals with the following conditions to complete the certificate of appropriateness application. One, that a landscape plan to include paving and soft landscaping is submitted for approval. Two, that specific plans for each of the building types are submitted for approval. Three, that detailed specifications and samples of materials are submitted for approval. And four, that subject to commission agreement, approval of the above and all other details is delegated to staff. And I would conclude my summary at this point and open it to the commission for questions.
Do any of the commissioners have questions for Carl?
See what I can do. Right. That one? That work?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. So,
Yeah, welcome.
as I'm looking at that, is the dashed line at the bottom of the section existing grade?
Dash line at the bottom of the section is the existing grade as currently defined.
So then the solid line there is proposed grade?
Final grade as defined on that particular plan. Yep.
Okay. Then the offset is from final grade, not from existing grade. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, yes, the way that's being read.
So we're measuring building height from existing grade or from proposed grade?
Finished grade in this particular case, I think. Something to bear in mind there, if you're aware of this site, is that on the Darwin Street side, the steep part of the site, we actually have, a lot of that is actually backfill. So we have a much steeper slope and it's not the original natural terrain. And in fact, when I was posting the site notice on that particular side of the site, it had been subject to further backfill just before Christmas. So it keeps on growing. So I.
Given as I look at it, though, it looks like this final grade to the 23-foot offset is, we're looking at a 23-foot offset from final grade, not from existing.
That's as it's currently defined.
Okay. So in fact, a wall height that is, say, 2 feet over could be 22 feet over.
That's possible depending on where you start from.
Okay.
That grade line. Yeah.
Thanks.
So it could be, with respect to what you're seeing out there now, effectively 22 feet taller in terms of
Or,
impact.
well, I don't know if anyone's got a scale handy, but
Nonetheless, is that the way the
unlike-
ordinance reads for measuring the height above grade for a finished building?
I think Michaela's been
I'm just
studying
reading
the
right now.
ordinances here.
Not,
That seems contrary to many that you
The
run
building
into
height
in
is-
other jurisdictions.
the vertical distance between the top of the roof and established grade at any given point of a building coverage.
Established grade meaning the way it was, the way it is now, I would assume.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, really, in the context of
Shouldn't
where
there
it starts
be-
from. I doubt that it's going to be 22 feet higher, but it's certainly going to be higher depending on where your baseline's
I
taken
mean,
from.
so if, I think we need definitions out of the zoning ordinance, because if,
We have a definition for established grade. It's the grade of a property prior to the most recent proposed development or construction activity.
so it seems like that line of grade offset is not an accurate way to be judging this.
I think that's a reasonable point. I also think that we need to be assessing what the original grade of this was prior to its consistent backfilling as well, which seems to be a moving target.
That would seems to be something that we have no access to, and
The applicant may have further information in this in the context of how that section line is defined. Certainly, it sort of dives below the existing grade in certain parts of the site and rises above it in others.
Yeah.
It's currently defined.
Well,
Then the building footprints themselves, and including this section, step back further towards Darwin Street, then would be defined by the current level area off Darwin Street, which is actually quite extensive.
That's kind of a similar question. Carl, would you mind going to the site plan? That's great.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way I look at that is that the interior lines are sort of an effort to show what the ordinary setbacks would be for purposes of establishing what special exceptions are needed, right? What I've been struggling with is that configuration doesn't match up with the current parcel lines. So I don't know how this is supposed to work, really, because I'm wondering if they are exchanging land with a neighboring parcel as part of this whole platting?
I believe and I'm sure the applicant will address this in greater detail, I believe that there is an easement agreement with the adjacent lot for the apartment building to the immediate south of this site with the access drive to that. As you will have noted, the two individual lots here don't quite abut each other. And previously, the easement would have taken on board that continuous private drive as well.
Well,
but for the purposes of establishing setbacks and special exceptions, an easement would not really be relevant, right? It's those run from the parcel.
That's correct. That's correct. And I know the applicant's been working on a more detailed site plan in the context of this particular layout. Hence the condition, amongst others.
Going along with that, Carl, there's an alley to the south of Lot 12 that serves the apartment. I'm not really clear where that sits with respect to the building number 12 and the lot line there. Is there a drawing that shows that?
I have no further detailed drawing at this point in time. That point has been flagged in detail by an immediate neighbor who I think will be addressing that. I believe the applicants have previously been in discussion about that particular point and the width of what's indicated on that lot and where the driveway itself actually sits in relation to those building footprints and the eave depth as proposed currently.
Okay.
So I can't confirm whether that's been resolved as I speak at the moment.
Very good. Do other commissioners have other questions for Carl? Well, let's bring the applicant up, please, to see if they can help us out with this.
Hang on a second.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and welcome.
I can't believe we were here a year ago. Time flies. I should be able to add context to your questions. They're all great questions, and hopefully with some of the additional information that I've got on my presentation that Carl doesn't, I can answer those questions.
So, I leave you with that. You can pull up what you need.
That works perfect. Thank you.
Grab an extra chair.
And as you start, I'd like to express our appreciation for you working closely with the neighbors. We've heard comments from them saying that you've really reached out to them, so that's commendable on your part. Thank you.
Thank you. We've tried. So I'm Dustin Holt, a principal at Dusty Baker Communities. I'm technologically incompetent, so I think it's this one. Yes, all right. I think, first of all, I want to thank Carl. Carl's actually spent a lot of time with us. We've tried to take his tutelage in what he's shared. I think he's been a good liaison with the neighbors. He's heard their concerns, helped put them into a narrative or a context that's easier for us to understand to then try and implement into our drawings. I also have to apologize. Our architect is in Mexico, so he had a trip planned. He was planning to be here back in December, and then without that hearing, he had a trip planned for tonight. So some of the super technical questions I'll try and answer. He would obviously be better, but we've read the staff report, and we're in agreement with the staff report. We appreciate what Carl's done. We would request your approval of it, and we believe we can finalize some of the finer points of the detail that we know we need to work through with a couple of the neighbors and a couple of the sites with Carl, especially with everything that he's done in relation to this project. But let me just give you a little. So here was the existing ground area plan. This was the 14-unit plat that was approved, preliminary plat and PD that was approved by the Planning Commission back in June. And this is the ground area plan that you last saw in January. And at this time, we heard comments about maybe the massing was a little too big, it may have been too tight, that we needed to do some further kind of refinement to fit some of the product. And so this is actually the ground area plan that was taken to the Planning Commission. So when we went to the Planning Commission, we showed them what we had presented to you. We talked about your comments, and this was the ground area, kind of breaking some of those buildings, tweaking some of those units. But it certainly did include the private drive, which was publicly called a raceway and a ring road. We then this was approved, and we really, frankly, spent some time thinking about it. We met with some neighbors. The 4 homes that are inside of this had concern, and frankly, the more we thought about it, we felt like it was a valid concern. West Capitol is a one-way street, and so they said, if someone comes and leaves, you're doubling the trip traffic in front of our homes. As they came into the project, they would have come north on West Capitol, they would have turned, and then as they left, they would have gone back by their home. So in hearing that and hearing how it may affect citizens who live there and frankly have lived there longer than I have and have lived in some older homes, we wanted to take that to heart. So that's really what was the impetus for us to start rethinking the design of this project. As you've seen or heard, this is the current design to try and answer Paul's questions specifically, or Commissioner Svensson's questions. The design that you saw that had a curve right here was the easement. So when we were working under this previous design, the easement was fully identified, legal description was put in, and that was identified inside of the plat and then also inside of the PD. One of the neighbors actually caught that we don't own fee simple property to that. He's correct, we do not own fee simple property, and we've actually told him that if we do not need that easement, we would be willing to vacate that easement. And so this actually is how the current plat sits. So this is currently one parcel, and then this is its separate and own standalone parcel right now. This would be subdivided into 2 lots. This would be 2 lots, and this would be their rear yard, and then this would be the rear yard for all 8 of the units that are on Darwin, and this would be their individual east-west kind of property. This, we believe, fits more in context with what Carl mentioned about deeper, more bowling alley-like lots that exist inside of this community. So I hope that answers at least one of your questions. As it relates to the private drive itself, this lot is actually 82 feet. And I know one of the neighbors has expressed concern because he measured it at 70. And so as he was looking at some side yard setbacks and the 14-foot drive, he was concerned about the home. Our ALTA survey, it's 82.5 feet wide, and there's a 14-foot drive easement on that far south end. And then I'll talk in a moment about how we're proposing actually to redesign that lot to further address some of his concerns. As has been mentioned, it's 6 structures, 12 townhomes. We have everything fronts onto public right-of-way, so there's no PD request. The lots range from just over 4,200 square feet to about 8,600 square feet. We've significantly shrunk the footprint of the overall square footage, not only the footprint, but the overall square footage of the units themselves. So when we were here in January, we were talking about 1,800 to 2,000 square foot total units, and we're now down in kind of 1,550 to 1,750 square feet for the total unit itself. And those are, by and large, 3-bedroom, 3-bath, 2-car garage. The proposed redesign helps with the perceived single-story structures there along Darwin. As Carl mentioned, the greater challenge in doing that is that the backs of those homes, or the rears of the homes, or the west end of those homes, are also where the grade is the most significant. And as you look at the grade and the offset, that's also the area where most of those exceptions are being requested, is at that west end of those homes, because they stick out because of the topography. And those are, as Carl mentioned, have been outlined. A couple of the kind of proposed redesign elevations. The question on finished grade and existing grade. So the existing grade is the existing, what is as close to the existing grade that we believe is the natural grade. The finished grade is where a lot of the fill right now currently is, and so some of that comes out with the product itself, and then some of it gets reset or reestablished adjacent to those buildings. So we want to be mindful of the existing, meaning native, as well as some of the future, which is more closely parallels the imported or illegally dumped grade, if that makes sense. But I think the bigger goal of the depiction of this is without the private drive, and I apologize, but this cross section is slightly askew. So one is straight east-west, and the other ran more parallel or perpendicular to West Capitol. But with the private drive that would have sat here, we ended up with homes that in many instances were 30, 35, and 40 feet away from the rear property of those 4 homes kind of inside of it. And now we're a much greater distance and separation from those homes. So this cross section, this light gray home is, I believe it's Bruce Shapiro's home, Mr. Shapiro's home. The darker one is Mr. Pignanelli's home, and then the one behind it is the home, the proposed home on lot 1 and 2, or the proposed structure on lot 1 and 2. As we've looked at the design elements, Carl did mention that because of the site, we do have garage doors facing those, and so we absolutely wanted to address that by making certain that they were OPEG in nature. Something that still was at a nice pedestrian scale, something that light could come through. We know on the non-garage facades, that's one of the areas in Carl's report, and an area that the neighbors have mentioned that needs some attention, and we're in agreement with that. We've also eliminated, after discussing with the neighbors, any cultured stone. Really, in looking at the context of the neighborhood, that was pretty easy for us to throw out, as well as vinyl windows. So I think this process has helped us refine the materiality for these units themselves. A couple other things that our initial concepts showed that we've since addressed, and I think these are important for me to show the evolution of this as we've talked with the neighbors and also as we've talked with Carl. But a couple of the comments that we heard, void to solid ratio of the windows, scale of the windows, size of the windows, size of the openness, no real kind of entry feature, especially on a couple of the units where the entry is on the side of the unit. And so we've gone to lengths and then window treatment, some of the trim around the windows. So we've gone to lengths to better make the ratio of the window more appropriate, make certain we've got a porch or a porte-cochere or something over those areas to really emphasize the entrance, even though some of them are on the side of the unit. And then here's the depiction of some of those upper ones, and then getting away from the cultured stone as well, but making certain that we're introducing lighting, landscaping, and an element that denotes here's the entry. One of the neighbors said it best, if I go trick-or-treating with my kids or grandkids, how am I going to know which door to go to? So we thought that was an absolutely valid concern. And I can't help myself but put design evolution, since this is the project known as Evo Twin Homes. But I think this is something that was not in the packet and something that some of the neighbors haven't seen. But this design was the initial design. It was included. We then, and some of these other ones you've seen, we then went to a change in colors and some of the materialities to better fit with the neighboring homes. We then started to address the window treatment, and then we further went to address the window treatment as we've made this kind of evolution just on this one particular structure itself. So as additional elements that we know we need to refine, and I would say this is part of the list that we would look, hopefully with your approval, would look to refine with Carl. Narrower chimneys where appropriate. I know there's some images where we've got big, wide, more flat, more modern chimneys. We recognize that is probably inappropriate in this setting, so narrowing those. Further refinement of the window treatment, further refinement of the entryway, a sense of arrival, legibility of it, and a separate sidewalk from the street. That was something that, particularly on West Capitol, we saw is something significant. Most of those homes have their own separate walk. You'll see in a minute couple of ways we're thinking about being able to accommodate that. Garage facade on the off side of the wall that doesn't have the actual garage door. We know we need some kind of opaqueness, windows, landscaping, which is again one of the reasons Carl wanted that as a condition, is the landscaping plan. And then when we get to landscaping, make certain that it denotes entry, that it's at a pedestrian scale, that it helps soften some of those exterior elevations, and more importantly, it helps soften some of the topography. We know that with the topography and some of the exceptions that are being asked for, good columnar trees can help soften some of that to fit into a better scale or better context, along with lighting, making certain that we've got wayfinding, entry sconces, porch lights, things that denote some of those things we mentioned above. So a couple of the neighbors in subsequent meetings, and then I also believe they've sent written responses or requests. So Mr. Milligan, who owns the home right to the north of Lot 11 and 12, would really like to see the north half of this, so Lot 12, be pushed as far to the east as we can. His home is actually, and that's another thing to note, I see Commissioner Richardson looking at that site plan or area plan. The footprint for the existing homes were actually set back. There was something in CAD that had them as a 10-foot greater setback than where they are. So if you look at those, they actually look like they're much further away from the street than they are. This is a correct depiction. So his home is actually the closest home. The corner of his home is about 12 feet from property or property line. So we would, in addition to what's been looked at before, we would ask for what a kind of a maximum setback that the commission might be willing to consider, and we would look to move lot number 12 as far east as we can. It actually helps in a couple of different ways. It pushes us a little bit further off the street to add more variation. It also pushes us back further to where a little bit flatter grade is, and so less impact to the existing grade is needed. And then because his home is as far west as it is, it opens up just immediately what's adjacent to his home. And then to help with that, additionally, we would actually look to have Lot 12 be potentially brought closer and arguably brought as close as his home, which is 12 feet from the public right-of-way. So this is a very simple, very crude depiction of what this would allow us to do. So one of his concerns, or one of the concerns, is with the 14-foot easement that goes up to the apartments, there was some concerns that the entry door was on that side. And I think that's a valid concern. This would allow us to shift Lot 12 further east, bring Lot 11 a little bit further, closer west, and then in the back, we would get that same kind of duplicative garage as you've seen on the homes on Darwin. So then it would eliminate all garages, at least in this structure, from being on West Capitol, and it would allow us to focus, whether it's one walkway, two walkways, a shared walkway, but something that is a single pedestrian access up to these homes, and we think it would help accommodate his concern of having the unit 12 be as far east as possible. And what's that? 11. Sorry, I had them backwards. I thought we came down and around 11 to 12. And another concern that Ms. DeGiorgio to the north of this site expressed was related to Lot 1. Her home is actually one of the homes set furthest back from the public right-of-way, and so for her even to have us push Lot 1 as far west as possible helps with the adjacency of the home next to her property. And so this is an area that, in further kind of review, we believe may also merit bringing as close as 11 or 12 feet from the property line to help with her view. She asked us to spend some time thinking about better architecture, more interesting architecture, something that she would be looking into. And so here's some of the images that we've gone to kind of further refine adjacent to her. So an introduction of a more customary kind of porch, window treatment up in the gable. I'm not certain that this big deck is actually a better element myself, but trying to again play with materials and colors still. I know we need to do that, but getting into some window treatment that reflects some of the homes in the adjacent and immediate area, narrowing up the chimney, the first kind of an attempt at narrowing up some of the chimney. Landscape, again, introduction of landscape down kind of between the units, especially even where the side setbacks have been being proposed to be reduced from the 10 feet to the 5 feet. This is the common walk kind of in a cross section, the common walk that would come down that would service two entry doors at the midpoint of the homes, so making certain that we still have landscaping, lighting, a legible entrance and acknowledgement. And then as far as the grade changes, so right now based on the grade change, we have about 6 lots that have something greater than 4 feet in grade change, and we have 6 lots that have less than that, and we range from 6 inches to actually almost 10 feet of grade change inside of these lots. As you can see, most of the ones where the grade impacts the most are the southwest or northwest corners of those units. And this is a big part of the reason for the height exceptions that are being requested. If we move the home further east on Lot 11, we should be able to push that home even further into the ground, which should have lessen the impact down to more like 5 or 6 feet. And then the lots with minimal impact or less than the 4-foot impact range from the 6 inches to the actual 4 feet. So with that, I'll answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time. We're appreciative of it, and we're hopeful we can take this to the next step of further refinement with staff per their recommendation. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioners, who has questions? Go for it.
I'll start with a couple of questions. Thank you very much. I think, one of the challenges that I was having with the staff report, we have elevations like this, and then we have refined elevations, and I'm feeling, without you expressing it specifically, well, you have in some of your evolution efforts, but these are schematics, obviously early schematics, and we have some additional refinement in some of the renderings, and then even further refinement, I think, in some of your views. So that helps. A couple of specific questions. I think the grade elevation is going to be a topic of later discussion. I don't know if we need to go back over it, except for maybe the question, is there illegal dumping happening on the site?
Yes.
Okay. But you have site elevations from what date?
So more importantly, what we tried to use, so topographically, we did our first topo back in September, October of 17.
17, okay.
And then in addition to that, what we tried to do is take the samplings, the borings and the samplings that we did that got through any debris or anything on the site to get back down to native. And so we tried to do more borings and more samplings to define where actual native was, particularly on the slope of Darwin. So that's where some of the existing elevation or native grade comes into play. So
that may be a very useful presentation at the future point, where you cut some site sections and have your geotech indicate where, we'll say, historic or recent grade is compared to current grade. Anyways, that might be very helpful. Other questions, maybe before I launch into anything else? Any other commissioners want to say anything else? Have other questions about the site issues, the site profiles and ramifications? You'll get to them. I mentioned, I think this before, the issue of the 2-car garage, which is a nice modern responsive to, unfortunately, to how many cars we all need these days. Any studies on any of them with single-car garage door openings? 2 cars, but 2 garage door openings. I know there's a width issue.
It's the depth. We did explore a couple of the upper lots, the Darwin lots, to have more of a tandem or a single that opens into a kind of a 2-car garage, and we ran into either width or depth issues. Yeah. So it pushed structures even further west, where we ran into an even greater kind of height special exception that would have been requested or needed.
I had one note here. I think one of your renderings for lot 1, I believe, is 1 to the far north. Yes. So you had that rendering there, which, in comparison to these typical early schematics, actually showed the second entry, which is side on the north side, back in behind the garage. Is that correct? Okay, so that answered that question. A number of your other comments about shifting, I think 1 and 2 and 11 and 12 seem to be where I have questions and sort of compatibility issues, I think, with the neighborhood, and you've started talking about those in there, shifting forward and back and up and down, and I'd encourage that to continue. Vertically, I think, is an issue as well. One of the public comments was about the height of that sidewall. Recognizing that you're using that sidewall as an entry, but could that entry be depressed and that whole units 1 and 11, I think, could they be depressed a few feet, to reduce that sidewall? I think there's enough height between the two units to make that work. Statement rather than question, I apologize. Others, I'll come back with, I'll find some other questions here, so.
Other commissioners, other questions?
You've lost me on your argument about the fill and the what's existing and what's not. Are you taking your heights from what's there now, or what it's going to be when you're done?
So it's a combination of both, and I'm not trying to be politically correct. We've looked at as best we can, what the existing grade is, meaning native grade, versus where current dumping grade is. So if we just went out and didn't go through the process of defining where native was, we would have a topo plan that would be far greater, far higher. And so we're looking at where at native we can fit the home in, knowing that the existing grade then, particularly on Darwin, would fall in between the homes to make kind of a more natural finished grade between those homes. Does that make sense? If I went out and shot topo today, it will look exactly like the finished grade right now. But that's not where I'm going to build them, because I'm not going to build the homes on deleterious material.
What topo is this?
That topo is going to be closer. It's the Platt-based
Is this
topo.
the ALTA survey?
So that's going to be based on the ALTA survey.
This is based on ALTA?
Yeah.
And then this topo is proposed?
Correct.
For the record, that was drawing 3.5, close to ALTA survey. Drawing 3 is proposed finished grade.
Correct.
Okay.
It seems like the presence of the fill would help you. Am I wrong about that?
I concur.
It would if I took the fill and assumed that that's where I was going to try and base my real finished product off of, right?
Well, I understand.
I mean, yes.
I understand you don't want to build on it because it's not native. It's probably worthless.
Yeah.
As a base for building on. But I'm just, I think what other people are going to say is that if we're taking heights off of what you're calling native, then we're underestimating what the special exception that you need is.
In some particular spots, you would be, yes. And the opposite argument is I come in, and I tried to do this with the neighbors, and we tried to be as open and candid with the neighbors as we could be, and we're trying to be the same here. I could have come in and said, here's my existing line, and then Frank would have called and said, why are you digging a giant hole to get rid of all the old fill, and now your unit is higher than you thought it was going to be, or you said it was going to be, or I understood it was going to be, right? So we've tried to be as open and honest with the neighbors, and we're trying to approach this the same way. So yeah, I mean, yes, it would help me, absolutely. In some instances, I could have a home 6 and 8 feet higher if I just showed you that line.
How horribly difficult would it be to put together a set of drawings that showed where the finished product is going to be relative to the dirt that's there now?
You have that.
We do?
Yeah. I mean, in the staff report, you have all of those down, every elevation, every topo. You have that. And that was a tremendously painful process. That was a 90-day process for us just to see if this concept could even work. So we embarked on that process and then went back to the neighbors and said, here's the reality of the site. Here's where the buildings are going to fit. Here's how high they're going to be.
Well, where's the site plan that shows existing grade and proposed grade together?
I think what Dustin is saying is that what he's calling final grade is actually existing grade.
It
and
is.
what he's calling existing grade is actually native
More native grade. Correct.
Your nomenclature is confusing as hell.
Well, I would take the Alta survey for what it is. That's the grade when the previous owner vacated the property. So why do we second grade guess the engineers?
Well, isn't that what final grade is?
Final grade is the
Alta?
grade when we're done and you get your building permit signed off.
No, I think what I think Dustin is saying is that what's labeled as final grade on the drawings
Correct.
is Alta.
Is more Alta. If you just took,
or is it actual?
no, if you just took Alta topographically.
That's what you're calling final grade.
Correct.
As I look at it, I'm no engineer of this type. It's looking to me like the bottom dashed line here is pretty close to Alta, at least where the section cut is, and that the solid line that says final grade is close to final grade that's on the other drawing. I'm thoroughly confused.
Well,
Again, I don't have Russ here for some of that, so.
Yeah.
You know, I think we've got a very challenging site, and I'd like to maybe move some of this into executive session.
Yeah.
But I do think that we as a commission should strive toward consistency and concurrence with the zoning regulations relative to, what was the original native grade before all of the fill was there. And that, and then also have an understanding of the fill, et cetera. I mean, I think it's a site that you've discussed already has a 50 to 60 foot fall across it. I would argue that, it's not only been impacted in terms of what native grade is by the fill, the more recent fill, but, frankly, Darwin and Beck Street are, have impacted the so-called native grades. The home that is immediately to the north of the 4 townhomes on Darwin Street is down at native grade in a hole, probably at least 10 feet below. Front door main floor elevation is at least 10 feet. It appeared to be below Darwin's street elevation. So I would, again, I have some opinions that I'm going to defer to the executive session, but I think a suggestion would be to meet with Carl and staff, get a better understanding exactly what the code says, and then craft an argument that is that you think is providing that information and is then asking for special exceptions that are in line with that. But we can talk about that in executive session.
Okay, thank you, all of you. Let's thank you, Dustin, and go into public comments here, and then you'll have a chance to come back up and talk some more to respond to that.
Right.
Public comments requested. Joan DiGiorgio, please come first. As always, if you can keep it to approximately 2 minutes, it would be appreciated. But we've only got 3, so you got a little leeway.
I'll do my best. So I did submit a letter, so I don't know if you've had a chance to read that. So I appreciate your review of that. I thought I'd maybe just touch on a few high points. I don't know if you could hear back there an audible sigh of relief on my part, because the original design was pretty problematic for me, and I don't know if we need to show it on the screen, but the original proposal for Lot 1, I mean, that is nothing that I see in my neighborhood. And on the last page, second to last page, I tried to look at the historic guidelines and looking at, again, the porch, building mass similar to those seen traditionally, solid to void, using window treatments, 12.7 on the last page of the roof, this big broad roof with these big eaves with the big chimney. You know, if there are any in the neighborhood, there are very few. It was interesting that Dustin then showed what is typical, those two little, and new construction, I might add. It's not something that's unattainable. And then finally, his efforts, which we appreciate, to move towards something that's really works in the neighborhood. So I'm hopeful. I'm still nervous, to be perfectly honest, and I really also appreciate moving it farther to the west. When the original drawing I saw, it was like right, so mine's that little, just on the left of the or the north of 1 and 2, and the original schematic that I saw, it was like right next to my house. So this is better, and better yet, if it's moved farther west, that really does make a difference. And then the original drawings I saw, you know, mine's this little one-story, and then it would be on the, what you've seen is what it looks like from the street, but on the north, it's basically a big blank wall that would be kind of looming over my home. So that's essentially it. And so, you know, I do feel like it, maybe I'll just follow with what just to remind us kind of where we need to go. And I do support the new design to eliminate the private drive, but there'd be a substantial impairment of my property values as well. The buildings have been pulled away from most neighbors. This is not the case with my property, where I have a looming 2-story structure next to my 1-story home with a facade that has no historic relevance. So again, that north facade is problematic. And they did a pretty good job, I think, on 11 and 12, if you notice, and Dustin mentioned that, the more vintage up by Darwin Street, a lot more variation, and it's just, for some reason, and again, cross fingers that we're going to get to, you know, work this out, but a lot more variation. So much better work to address the guidelines than this one that is going to be really the one you're going to see on West Capitol Street. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mark Milligan, please.
Hi, thank you guys for your time. So I'm at 580 North. I'm adjacent to lot number 11. And yeah, one of my comments, well, first of all, I'm very appreciative of them the developer working with the neighbors to come up with a plan that is much better than the initial ring road or whatever you want to call it. This, from my perspective, is much better. So I greatly appreciate that, and I hope that this overall design does go through compared to the last one. Then in details for lot 11, I was concerned about the wall height just next to me there. My original suggestion was to push that down because it's quite a bit higher than the other half on side 12, but I think that sliding it back would also work as well. I mean, all I've seen so far is what was put up tonight, so I don't know any details, but in concept, that seems like a good potential solution. And then for lot 12, and it's actually 11 and 12, the width issue that I brought up, originally I looked at site plan 3, and it doesn't show the right-of-way, which is for the apartment building parking. And when I talked to the developer, he said there was an issue with the site plan. So what I did was went and looked at the county recorder's description of the lot, and it gives 82.5 feet, but that's not the lot width, that's the street frontage. So if you take the angle in the county recorder description, you can come up with a triangle and calculate the width. And that width that I calculated is 70.343 feet. So if you take the 10-foot setback, the 14-foot right-of-way, the width of the building, it's wider than what I calculated. Then I took a tape measure between the two lots, and it's just a tape measure stretched 70 feet, but it was 70 feet, 70 point something, 60, I don't know, but it was close to what I calculated. So I'm still not sure how that fits physically on the lot as proposed. Let's see. As far as the staff recommendations on number 4, there seem to be some fairly large issues that still need to be resolved. So I'm not sure I'm totally comfortable at this point with that being completely a staff issue versus before the commission. But again, I am very happy that this is what's up now as opposed to the previous design. I think that was it. I will say that as far as the grade and the fill, it won't help for drawings, but there are historic air photos on the Utah Geological Survey website going back to the 20s or 30s that show this area. You can get an idea of what the evolution of the site is, at least in general, at that scale. So I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce Shapiro, please.
Good evening, and I don't have very much to say. I just wanted to say that we filed a major appeal on this, so for the private driveway against the private driveway that was approved. So we're really happy that we're working on a different design. I don't oppose what's being presented. I will support whatever Mark and Joan need to support for their lot. But as far as my lot, I live at 588 West Capitol. I'm very happy with the way the design is going. I'm a little concerned about the natural grade. It seems like it's been like that for 20 years, that site, at least that I know of. And I haven't seen a lot of field dirt. Maybe I'm missing something, but it seems like the site's been like that for a long period of time. The only thing I'm opposed to is the recommendation that the commission give up authority to the staff to make approvals. We'd like it to stay with the commission. We think just by your conversation tonight concerning grade that it shows that it should stay here. That's all I have.
Good. Thank you. Frank, would you like to speak?
Good evening. I know that I've talked to you before about issues regarding West Capitol Street, and sometimes it may feel like it's something out of the Lord of the Rings. We talk about ring roads and towers and ancient neighborhoods and things like that. West Capitol, by the way, I'm Frank Pignanelli. I live at 598 Northwest Capitol Street. I've lived there for almost 30 years. And it's a great neighborhood. It's one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. And in fact, our little area is even different from the rest of Marmalade. It's just a unique area. And so when the Planning Commission approved the ring road, Bruce and I and the rest of the neighbors, we filed a very large, comprehensive objection and appeal. And we will fight that ring road with every fiber of our being because it destroys the neighborhood. And we are so grateful and so appreciative to the developers that they have spent an incredible amount of time and efforts coming up with an alternative. They really have. They've met with the neighborhood. They've come up with alternatives. They've even read our lengthy objection and plugged different things into the consideration. So we're grateful for that. They really have gone, in my opinion, even beyond what normally has this happened. So what you see before you is something that the neighborhood, and we have a great mailing list, but a lot of the neighbors conveyed to me that they're appreciative and they would like this concept to move forward. Obviously, there's still issues to work out with placement and design and things of that nature. But I'm here to say that the neighborhood is grateful to developers for working with us. We're grateful to the staff. We're grateful to the commission. And as Bruce said, the questions you asked tonight are very knowledgeable. And so we believe the motions before you would give the green light to that. Number 4, I'm an attorney, but I'm not a zoning attorney or a planning attorney. I just want to make sure that we're not foreclosed from anything on item number 4, so that if we have to bring something back to you, that we can. But other than that, we wish again to express our appreciation to the developers. We're on the right track for this. We feel very good about it, and it's going to be, that we achieve the compatibility of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the applicant like to come back up and respond to any of the public comments? You good? Right. In that case, we move into executive session. And who'd like to begin?
I have a couple of things. And first off, again, I just want to reiterate what Mr. Pignanelli and others have said. I think that we've seen this with a number of other developers that have come in front of us, that when they work with the neighborhood, it makes our lives much better and frankly improves the outcomes significantly. And, not having been here last January, but having read the previous report and seeing where the developer is as of the submittal, significant improvements. However, I think that a number of questions and concerns that I have with regard, and that I think another round of refinements and improvements would be helpful. I mean, first off, I believe it was the first public comment, I believe Joan was pointing to her house relative to lots 1 and 2, and the developer acknowledged it as well, that the existing homes had slid significantly off of West Capitol Hill, somewhat to the west, whether it was 10 feet or it sure looks like it's more than 10 feet. It does not give an accurate representation of really how these homes fit within the context. Also, while the grades are, and I'll come back to the grades, but the street itself is not shown. And I think that with West Capitol Hill, in this, and certainly this block being a very unique street and having a very unique street character and unique within the Marmalade, as we heard, I think it would be very helpful to have that existing street context nailed down, have the existing context of the neighboring homes addressed in the overall, addressed more definitively, if you will, in the overall site plan submittal. I also, I think to the comment, I found it challenging to look at, while there's some dimensions on this, I think that we need to, I would like to see dimensions setbacks from the street. I'd like to see dimensions of the width of the lots perpendicular to the development. There's just some information there that that would help me better understand and better be able to, I think, support this project moving forward. Obviously, there's a lot of changes that the developer is contemplating relative to, especially relative to lots 1, 2, 11, and 12, which are great, I think. It's a bit of a moving target, is I think where I'm at, and that I'd like to see where that, I'd like to see that target, be a little bit more in focus for me to be able to support this. A lot of other things to congratulate the developer on. I think, again, recognizing that traditional development patterns by getting rid of the ring road, working to address the scale by downsizing the buildings so that they're more in scale. But it is a very eclectic area with, a range of different buildings of different eras. I think it would be helpful. In the staff report, there's a series of photos that try to describe West Capitol and Darwin, and the photos seem to be out of order. And there's enough angles, I couldn't figure out where I was looking at, and I'm still not sure. I think at a very minimum, having a series of photographs that are, if we're going to go in that direction, that show the street in order of the existing development is imperative. We've asked on several past submittals to look also at relative elevation of the existing buildings and the relative setbacks. And I think that would be very helpful for the developer as we address some of these issues that we talked about a little bit earlier, some of the questions relative to what kind of to what extent of a special exception would you be actually requesting, especially along Darwin, and helping us to understand, because I think it's the Ensign Apartments to the south, if I didn't mutilate the name, is a taller building, set down a little bit again because of grades. I think more information with regard to that would be very, very helpful for me to be able to provide more information, more feedback. Then lastly, back to the grades and the grading. I think there is the existing grading, and it's my opinion, and I believe that it would be consistent, frankly, with the zoning code, is that, that you look at it, try and define, okay, where, the age of this fill, et cetera, like that. I think coming in with something that tries to show where that native grade is relative to the street, relative to the neighbors, would be helpful, and then coming up with, I think, just working with staff to come up with something that's in line with the code, and then because I'm not it's a site that drops 60 feet, 50 feet, whatever it is. I'm not 70 feet. I'm not opposed to approving necessarily a special exception on this site. Personally, I'm not going to speak for any of my fellow commissioners, but personally, but I think that David Richardson absolutely nailed it, which is we need to be consistent. We've heard that from administration in terms of implementation, and so I think it's only fair to other applicants, and I think we need to have a basis of which to approve, that special exception. Lastly is, you talked about it at the end, materials and details and traditional development patterns of the buildings themselves, entrances, porches, wayfinding technique elements, materials and moving, and I'd like to understand better what the materials are. I would say that some of what I saw in the submittal packet felt very out of character with the neighborhood developments with traditional, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be traditional and mimicking. We have as a board approved some relatively modern materials and treatments, but I think they have been of their time and of their place, but they have been in context with the neighborhood. And some of what I saw was cultured stone, single planes that change materials sort of arbitrarily, some treatments that in my mind felt out of just I read in somebody's comment that it feels more of an 80s development, and I think that's probably a great way of looking at it. What I saw tonight is moving in the right is starting to move in the right direction. I would like to encourage that, but those are my comments, and I would like to see more resolution to those for me to be able to support this project moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Shelley, have you got some thoughts for us?
Just the same thought that I had last time, that they kind of read, even though they're twin homes, they sort of look like one massive structure, each one. And so I'm concerned about the rhythm of these buildings compared to the smaller surrounding homes. Oh, same concern.
Is there something you'd, taking that concern and putting it into a request or suggestion?
It's sort of fundamental. If you're doing a twin home, and I understand, of course, why they're doing it, but it results in pretty massive structures.
Okay, all right.
I think Shelley's, excuse me, I think that comment, excuse me, goes back to Tom, and Tom really summarized everything I was going to say, so thank you very much. But the context, I think that comparative context to the adjacent historic structures, I think, is what's really important to understand how these really feel next to these historic buildings on West Capitol. I have less issues on Darwin. I think it looks like quite an interesting dynamic, and I keep seeing little renderings and things. It's kind of like, oh, that looks cool. We haven't seen that yet. Where's that information? Where's that coming from? So I think it's that comprehensiveness that we're looking forward to. But I think in particular I think 1, 2, 11, and 12 are really critical. Their context is really critical. How they're their front elevations, how they relate to the street, where is the sidewalk on these site plans kind of questions, and then how they relate to these neighbors. We've got, immediate adjacencies to 4 historic buildings, I think, at least, and how does it really relate to those?
Maybe that's a point at which some of the scale issues are addressed as well.
Yes.
We don't have much information on those, and they're being taken at the same scales as all the others, which don't have the adjacency issues. Robert, do you have something?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Victoria? David?
I've got a couple things. Want to commend the applicant on a much, much better proposal. This was a full year on the calendar and light years ahead at the same time, and sounds like you're working with the community, which is very good. As Tom mentioned, and helpful to us. I want to make a couple observations and end with my largest concern. One is that just because this is a historic neighborhood doesn't mean you need to give us a historic design. And I think you need to be careful of the adage that Confucius tells us, that the camel is a committee's version of a horse. So don't feel the design guidelines, I think, are rather liberal in what they allow you to do in terms of time and place. And what's most important really in there is not maybe the contemporary or historic look of something, but the form and the scale, and how the form and the scale of the new buildings relate with the form and the scale of the neighborhood. That's probably the most critical thing. I could wax on about a bunch of things. I think you're going in the right direction. You're almost there. But the biggie is going to be when you come back and ask for a special exception for heights. And it's my opinion, and staff will have to issue something to this regard, that the existing grade, when you purchased this property, when you did the first ALTA survey, is existing grade. I mean, there could be 1,000 feet of fill. You could drill down to the very bottom of Lake Bonneville and call that some other form of grade, but your existing grade was when you bought it. Your final grade is the final grade when your project is complete and all of the landscaping is done. And I think we need to see a true site plan, a true engineering site plan on this, where we see the ALTA topo, the ALTA lot lines, the streets, the top, back of curb, all of that stuff. And then overlay on top of that what you're going to do and exactly where the neighbors' homes are and so on. And I think that will make it much easier for us to review this. And I think it's really paramount. I don't think we can say, well, great, have 9 feet of excess height there without really knowing what we're approving. And I'll commend you for providing these detailed sheets. I think these were very helpful, just that we have confusion over what is existing grade. So that's it. Thank you. I look forward to seeing in the next revision of this. I think it'll be really good.
I think what I'd add to David, and a lot of the comments that have been promoted here are things I had said as well. Taking off from what David said, we can't be debating what the grades are. We need to have it perfectly clear when it's presented to us, so we can say, yeah, that works. At this point, there seems to be a hesitation to be able to push it forward at this meeting because of these uncertainties. A second item is, that, again, following up with David and what some others have said, is that your townhouses that are the contemporary designs, I'm feeling are more effective and more appropriate and better worked out. The ones where you're trying to be a little bit more traditional, historic, they're the ones that we don't understand well enough and don't seem to be working for us. So I'd like more information on those, especially in the context, as Charles said, on lots 1 and 2 and lots 11 and 12, because those have the adjacencies, and they're the ones that really matter. Darwin, I'm less concerned with, because they're sitting on their own, and they've got their own context. And that's it from my end. Esther, do you have? Okay.
Ready for motion?
I have one more thought
Go
that I
ahead,
just
Charles.
added, and it's just in response, it's just a seconding actually of a comment that you made during the presentation, the applicant, about, I'm not sure about these decks. And I think that gets us into the weeds just a little bit on the designs of these buildings, but I don't think we're sure about the decks either. I think be careful on how those are presented, supported, what kind of railings go around them, their extents, and how that fits into the neighborhood again.
Yeah, historically, houses have porches rather than decks, or if there is a second story outside space, it's contained within the volume of the house. So your observation of and questioning that was appropriate.
It's not. You can.
Yeah, would
You would need to invite him back.
yeah, applicant, please come
And
forward.
I have a question for the applicant, so that's great.
Okay, come on forward, Dustin. Let's.
And I asked this question with absolutely no disrespect to the neighbors. We're struggling with, we love the modern, more refined. We're struggling with the other, but we've heard comments that it needs to tie more closely, or the concern is that it doesn't tie closely to the historic. So we've tried to look at windows in void ratios, we've tried to look at window treatment, but candidly, we've struggled with that, and I don't know how you reconcile what you guys saw versus what we also heard from several neighborhood meetings, which appear to be opposing. So
I'll answer that. It's completely philosophical. In my opinion, it is truly Confucian.
No, the way you said it was perfect. But that's, so, yeah. I mean, that is one thing we're struggling with.
Yeah, I think it is clearly a challenge, how to deal with that, and a bad fake historic building is worse than most anything else.
Agreed.
A lot of your evolution sheet, the plans where you were showing, or the renderings where you showed 3 or 4 iterations, there was a lot of progress, I think. And you're responding to some of those, the window forms and the scale of those and the treatment. It is a challenge, though, and it's hard to tease out the truly modern aspects that are just the nature of modern construction today, and get something that really relates and is compatible. There are some great examples, though, that we've seen in the avenues in particular, that little shotgun house and some others that completely new construction. And staff, Carl can tell you to send you to some of those,
Okay.
and so that they can wrestle with those forms. I think it's that interpretation of the historic form, adapting it to the modern, though, rather than kind of the direction that it's come.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I too acknowledge that it's a challenge. You got to get back or consider the basics of scale, form, volume, solid voids, and not so much worry about the
gingerbread.
The gingerbreads, the flourishes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's really
true to form.
It's obviously challenging. I mean, the biggest element on any of these buildings is a garage door, and how does that fit and integrate onto West Capitol, a 2-car garage door? That's why I've been asking these questions about that from a year ago. It's just a really challenging, big element that's hard to subdivide and to bring it down to human scale.
Yeah, and speaking of garage door, one, I don't mean to be pedantic about this, but make sure it's clear, is opaque means no light passes through something. Translucent
That's the
light
word I was-
passes through,
that's the word I was
but there's
looking
not
for.
visibility. So
Non-opaque.
we'd like
I
translucency.
think I said opaque,
as a-
but non-opaque.
yeah, not opacity.
And just one last thing, which is, we're not here, I mean, the rules, to a certain degree are for those people that just don't get it. But the idea that you are trying to tailor your developments so that they nestle into the existing context, that, in my mind, is an appropriate guideline in terms of when you start to look at, I mean, scale and form, rhythm, and all of that are the elements to keep in mind. But they, it's and again, as one of the public comments made, which is, a two-story, blank wall, pushed right up against my, On the other hand is, we've seen plenty of proposals where there's the 8x8 picture window that's looking right into somebody else's, bedroom window on it with a 10-foot, side yard. Completely inappropriate, regardless of, scale and, regardless of whether it's an 8x8 or a 6x6 or a 4 foot wide by 8 foot tall that meets the the proportions if you start to read the rules. I also think that again you've got these big west facing walls, especially up or views, which are great views, but part of urban living is the dialogue you create between the homes and the street and the community they live in. And so I do think that although I didn't make the comment, I think that thinking about Darwin and what are the opportunities to make those spaces that you are creating be more than just simply a dead driveway, or more than just to make it into a parking court, but the emphasis on court. The same down with 11, 12, and 1 and 2 is looking at that. Again, I think it's trying to. You're on the right track, though. It's tailoring these designs to the context in which they're setting into. That you're very deliberate about why you're doing something, not just simply because the rule book says I got to do this.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, but before we excuse the applicant and return to executive session, the west end of the commission here has a procedural question to ask. And that is, in its current form, I think this is an easy project to deny. However, would the applicant be comfortable with continuing this to a future meeting, to table your proposal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dustin. We'll return to executive session. Commissioners, any other discussion? Or is someone prepared to put forward a motion?
I would move in the case of PLN HLC 2017-00696 and 930 that we table this. I think typically we have to say when we're tabling it to.
You don't have to. It's always nice if you can. Some of those timing issues can be difficult to follow. What we need is a reason for tabling it.
Just to provide further detail as set forth in our discussion. So I think there was some very specific guidance given, and they could certainly come back at our next meeting or whenever they would choose to within the next 6 months.
I'll second that.
Before we proceed, do we want to give them an outline of the items we'd like them to be addressing? Or
I think that's been well covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that case, we have a motion and a second for tabling this until the next meeting. Need to take a vote, please, starting from my right.
Aye.
Hyde, aye. Shepherd, aye.
Aye.
Esther, aye.
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 That motion passes. This item is tabled until our next meeting. Thank you very much to the applicants and the public. If there are no other issues, we are adjourned for the night. Thank you.